Imagine for a moment. All the world's leaders, all the bosses, all the decision-makers suddenly changed. In the seats sit no longer the old generations, but a young generation, raised on phones, who have never seen a world without the internet, with entirely different values. Generation Z. So if they took control of the world, what kind of world would we wake up to? First, let's be clear. Who exactly is Generation Z? According to researchers, those generally born between 1997 and 2012 make up this generation. That is, those who are today in their early 20s or in their youth. In America alone, more than 68 million people, and billions of young people around the world. A rising generation whose numbers grow every day. The most defining feature of this generation is this: they have never known a world without the internet. Smartphones, social media, instantly accessible information, for them, as natural as air. According to research, a Gen Z youth spends on average more than 2 hours a day on social media. They are connected to information, entertainment, and each other always through a screen. This is why they are called digital natives. In their world, hobbies have changed too. Short videos, games, digital content are at the center of their lives. According to an interesting statistic, 1 in 3 social media content creators in the world is from Generation Z. So they are not just viewers, but also creators. A generation that creates its own channels, its own voices, and its own cultures. So what is this generation afraid of? Research gives a clear answer: climate change. According to one survey, about 44% of Generation Z say their greatest fear is the climate crisis. For them, this is not a distant threat, but a reality that will directly affect their own future. This is why the environment is among the issues they are most sensitive about. But their fears are not limited to climate. According to research, Generation Z is a far more anxious generation compared to previous ones. About 1 in 4 young people say they feel anxious about the future almost all the time. Economic uncertainty, worry about finding work, the unknown the future will bring, weigh on this generation's shoulders like a heavy burden. And this is exactly why this generation differs greatly from the previous ones in one area: mental health. Generation Z is the first generation to value mental health the most and to not shy away from seeking support. According to research, they openly talk about this subject that was once even hard to mention. For them, emotional well-being is at least as important as physical health. Another thing that defines Generation Z is diversity. According to researchers, this generation is the most diverse in history. Different cultures, different identities, different ways of life. For them, this is not a threat, but a richness. The majority believe that differences strengthen a society, and this deeply shapes their worldview. So what about work and money? Here, too, there is a surprising picture. According to research, money is important for Generation Z, but not enough on its own. They expect 3 things from a job: money, meaning, and well-being. They want their work to have a purpose, to make them feel good. Working only for a salary is not for this generation. And here's the most surprising data. According to a survey by one of the world's largest research firms, only 6% of Generation Z say their primary goal is a leadership, that is, a boss position. So the traditional ambition to rise, to rule, to reach the very top is very weak in this generation. For them, rather than climbing the career ladder, a balanced and meaningful life is more valuable. For this generation, work-life balance is almost sacred. According to research, more than 70% of Generation Z have considered leaving or have left a job that does not offer flexible working. For them, life is not just about work. A generation that defends living to work rather than working to live. Now let's come to the real question. With all these traits, if Generation Z ruled the world, what might change? Of course, no one can know the future for certain. But looking at this real data we can make some strong predictions. Here's a scenario of how the world might probably look if this generation took the seat. In all likelihood, the first change would be in the environment. Since climate is this generation's #1 concern, according to experts, their administration would probably place environmental policies at the very top. Renewable energy, carbon reduction, sustainability. These would most likely become not options, but necessities. A green planet could be one of their highest priorities. The second big change would be in technology. This generation sees artificial intelligence not as a threat, but as a tool. According to research, the vast majority of Generation Z already use AI tools. If they were in power, they would probably place technology and AI at the center of the state, education, and business. Perhaps bureaucracy would be replaced by smart systems. Generation Z is a generation skeptical of traditional authority and secrecy. According to research, their trust in the current political system is quite low. So according to experts, their administration would probably be far more transparent. Instead of decisions behind closed doors, an open, shared, accountable style of governance could come to the fore. Perhaps every decision would be as open as a social media post. The business world could change radically too. Since this generation holds flexibility and balance above all else, probably practices like the 4-day work week, remote work, and flexible hours would become the norm. The rule of coming to the office at 9 and leaving at 5 might become history. The very definition of work could be rewritten entirely. Considering the importance they place on diversity, according to experts, that a world ruled by Generation Z could be far more inclusive. Broader space could be given to different identities, different cultures, and minorities. Equality and representation would probably be at the center of governance. The world of their dreams could be a world that makes room for everyone. Perhaps the biggest change would be in the purpose of work. Since for this generation, meaning and well-being are as important as money, according to experts, their administration could build a system that measures not only economic growth, but also people's happiness. Mental health, welfare, and quality of life could perhaps become the new measures of a country's success. But every coin has two sides. The rule of such an idealistic generation could also face serious challenges. For instance, research shows a deep division within this generation. Especially between young women and men, values are increasingly diverging. According to experts, such a division could make reaching common decisions difficult. Another challenge could be this. Since this generation is not very eager for leadership positions, according to experts, finding enough willing leaders to fill the seats could become a problem. In a world where everyone wants balance and well-being, who would take on the heavy responsibilities? This could be a great contradiction this generation must solve. And we must not forget, this is also a very anxious generation. According to experts, constant anxiety about the future and high expectations could lead to an overly cautious or indecisive attitude in governance. But perhaps the opposite would happen. Perhaps this anxiety would lead them to make more careful, more thoughtful, and more responsible decisions. How would it be if Generation Z ruled the world? There is no certain answer. But there is one fact that does not change. According to research, by the year 2030, this generation, and the one just before it, will make up 3/4 of the world's workforce. So in fact, this is not an if question, but a when question. Because the future, sooner or later, will be in their hands. And what that world will be like, time will tell.